What if I told you that some people would rather burn an entire relationship to the ground than admit they were wrong? They don't just lose people, they destroy everything that once made those relationships meaningful. Today, you'll discover why narcissists leave behind broken families, exhausted partners, divided workplaces, and emotional wreckage wherever they go. And the reason is probably far different from what you've been told. Have you ever walked away from someone wondering, how did everything become so toxic so quickly? Maybe it started with admiration, affection, or promises that felt genuine. Then, almost without warning, every conversation became an argument, every success became a threat, and every peaceful moment somehow turned into conflict. If you've experienced that, stay with me until the end, because understanding this pattern isn't just about explaining their behavior. It's about protecting your future from repeating it. And if this topic has ever described someone in your life, let me know in the comments with one word: awakened. You're not identifying a person, you're recognizing a pattern. Imagine walking through a neighborhood after a powerful storm. The houses are still standing, but the windows are shattered, the trees are uprooted, and the silence feels unsettling because something important has been lost. This is often what life looks like after prolonged exposure to narcissistic behavior. The damage is not always dramatic or immediately visible. More often, it is emotional, gradual, and deeply personal. People begin to lose confidence without realizing it. Families become divided over constant conflict. Friendships fade because trust has been replaced by suspicion. Even workplaces can become tense environments where fear, competition, and manipulation quietly replace teamwork and respect. The trail of destruction rarely appears overnight. It forms one conversation, one accusation, one broken promise, and one emotional wound at a time. What makes this pattern so confusing is that the narcissist often avoids taking responsibility for the damage. Instead, they may blame circumstances, other people, or even the very individuals who have been hurt. This creates a cycle where those around them start questioning their own memories, intentions, and judgment. Instead of asking why someone keeps creating conflict, they begin wondering if they are somehow causing it. That shift in thinking is one of the most painful consequences because it slowly erodes self-trust. The emotional wreckage spreads beyond the immediate relationship. Children may grow up believing love is unpredictable. Friends may distance themselves to avoid being caught in ongoing drama. Colleagues may become anxious, expecting criticism instead of collaboration. Over time, what was once a healthy environment becomes shaped by tension, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion. The most heartbreaking reality is that many people focus so much on repairing the relationship that they fail to notice how much of themselves has been worn away in the process. By the time they recognize the full extent of the damage, they are not simply grieving the relationship they lost. They are grieving the confidence, peace, and sense of identity that slowly disappeared along with it. At the heart of many narcissistic relationships lies a powerful truth that most people do not recognize at first. Control matters more than connection. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, trust, vulnerability, and the freedom for both people to have their own thoughts, feelings, and identities. A narcissistic dynamic works very differently. Instead of asking, "How can we grow together?" the unspoken question often becomes, "How can I stay in control?" That single difference changes everything. Love becomes conditional, communication becomes strategic, and affection is often given or withdrawn, depending on whether it strengthens the narcissist's position. In the beginning, this need for control can be difficult to detect because it is often disguised as deep care or intense devotion. They may want to know where you are, who you spend time with, or what you are thinking every moment of the day. At first, it can feel flattering, even comforting, because it resembles closeness. But over time, the questions become expectations, the expectations become rules, and the rules slowly begin to limit your independence. Without realizing it, you may start changing your behavior simply to avoid conflict or criticism. Control also extends into emotions. A narcissist may decide when problems are discussed, whose feelings deserve attention, or what version of events is accepted as the truth. If you express disappointment, you may be told you are too sensitive. If you celebrate your success, they may redirect the conversation back to themselves. If you disagree, they may treat your opinion as a personal attack instead of a normal difference in perspective. In this environment, genuine emotional connection becomes almost impossible because connection requires equality, and equality threatens control. Over time, the relationship stops feeling like a partnership and starts feeling like a performance. You begin measuring your words, anticipating reactions, and questioning your own instincts. Instead of feeling emotionally safe, you become emotionally cautious. The tragedy is that many people mistake this constant effort for love, believing that if they can just communicate better or try harder, the relationship will finally become peaceful. But lasting connection cannot exist where one person's need for power consistently outweighs another person's need for respect. Real love encourages freedom, individuality, and mutual growth, while control slowly erodes each of those qualities until the relationship no longer feels like a place of belonging, but a place of emotional survival. Chaos is not always an accident in narcissistic relationships. Very often, it becomes a powerful strategy that keeps other people emotionally off balance. Healthy relationships thrive on consistency, honesty, and emotional safety because those qualities allow trust to grow over time. But when someone relies on manipulation to maintain influence, stability becomes a problem. A calm, confident person is harder to control than someone who is constantly confused, anxious, or trying to restore peace. That is why chaos can become one of the most effective tools in the narcissist's playbook. At first, the confusion may seem small. A promise is made one day and denied the next. A compliment is followed by an unexpected insult. A meaningful conversation suddenly turns into an argument over something completely unrelated. You find yourself wondering how such a simple discussion became so emotionally exhausting. Instead of resolving issues, every attempt to communicate creates even more uncertainty. Over time, you stop expecting clarity and begin expecting conflict. This unpredictability has a powerful psychological effect. When you never know what version of the person you will encounter, you become hyper-aware of every word, every facial expression, and every shift in mood. You begin monitoring their emotions instead of your own. Your energy is spent preventing the next explosion rather than living your own life. In many cases, this constant state of alertness becomes so normal that you no longer recognize it as emotional stress. It simply feels like your everyday reality. Chaos also distracts from accountability. When every week brings a new crisis, the previous hurt is never fully addressed. One argument replaces another before the first one is resolved. Important conversations are interrupted by fresh accusations, dramatic reactions, or emotional outbursts. As a result, the real issues remain buried beneath an endless cycle of conflict. The focus shifts away from unhealthy behavior and toward calming the latest storm. Perhaps the most damaging consequence is that chaos slowly changes your relationship with yourself. You begin doubting your memory, your judgment, and even your emotional reactions. Instead of asking whether the behavior is acceptable, you start asking whether you are expecting too much. That is the hidden power of constant confusion. It weakens your confidence while strengthening their influence. The moment you recognize that chaos is not simply bad luck, but a repeating pattern, you begin to reclaim something incredibly valuable: your ability to trust your own reality again. One of the most misunderstood forces behind narcissistic behavior is envy. Most people think of envy as simply wishing they had what someone else has, but in narcissistic dynamics, it often runs much deeper. Another person's happiness, confidence, success, or even inner peace can feel like a personal threat. Instead of being inspired by someone else's achievements, the narcissist may experience them as evidence that they are no longer the center of attention. That emotional reaction can quietly transform admiration into resentment, support into competition, and love into subtle sabotage. This is why many people notice a confusing pattern. During your struggles, the narcissist may appear supportive, comforting, or even heroic. But when you begin to heal, gain confidence, or achieve something meaningful, their attitude suddenly changes. They may become distant, critical, dismissive, or strangely irritated without any obvious reason. Your success exposes something they are deeply uncomfortable with, the reality that your value does not depend on their approval. Instead of celebrating your growth, they may feel as though your progress somehow diminishes their importance. Envy rarely announces itself openly. It often hides behind sarcasm, backhanded compliments, constant comparisons, or subtle attempts to minimize your accomplishments. You might share exciting news only to hear, "It's not that impressive," or "Anyone could have done that." If praise comes your way, they may quickly redirect the conversation toward themselves or point out your flaws to restore the balance in their favor. The goal is not necessarily to destroy your achievement, but to reduce the emotional impact it has on your confidence. Over time, this pattern can become incredibly damaging. You may stop sharing good news because you expect it to be criticized. You may downplay your accomplishments to avoid conflict. You may even begin feeling guilty for succeeding, believing that your happiness somehow causes problems in the relationship. That is one of the quiet tragedies of narcissistic envy. It teaches people to make themselves smaller, just to keep someone else comfortable. Healthy relationships work in the opposite direction. When someone genuinely cares about you, your victories become shared celebrations, not silent competitions. They encourage your growth because your confidence does not threaten their identity. Understanding this difference is essential because it reminds you that real love expands your world, while envy disguised as love slowly convinces you to shrink it. One of the most exhausting aspects of a narcissistic relationship is that it often feels as though your emotional energy is constantly being drained. It's not because you care too much or because you're emotionally weak. It's because the relationship gradually becomes one-sided, with your attention, empathy, patience, and reassurance flowing in one direction. While healthy relationships involve a natural exchange of emotional support, narcissistic dynamics often revolve around one person's endless need for validation, admiration, and attention. Over time, you may find yourself giving more and more while receiving less and less in return. In the beginning, this imbalance can be difficult to recognize. You may believe you're simply supporting someone through a difficult time or helping them overcome personal struggles. But as the months pass, you notice that every conversation somehow circles back to their problems, their feelings, their frustrations, or their achievements. When you try to share your own experiences, the topic quickly shifts away from you. Your emotions are acknowledged only briefly before the spotlight returns to them. Little by little, your needs begin to disappear from the relationship. This emotional extraction doesn't always happen through obvious demands. Sometimes it appears as constant crises that require your immediate attention. Sometimes it comes through guilt, making you feel responsible for their happiness or emotional stability. Other times, it takes the form of endless criticism that leaves you working harder to earn approval that never fully arrives. No matter how much reassurance, loyalty, or understanding you offer, it never seems to be enough. The emotional hunger remains, and you become the person expected to satisfy it. The psychological impact can be profound. You begin waking up already tired not because of physical exhaustion, but because you're carrying the emotional weight of someone else's world while neglecting your own. You monitor their moods before making decisions. You rehearse conversations in your mind, hoping to avoid conflict. You celebrate their victories while quietly carrying your disappointments alone. Eventually, you forget what it feels like to have your own emotional needs consistently recognized and respected. The most important realization is that love should restore your emotional energy, not constantly consume it. Healthy relationships create space for both people to be heard, supported, and understood. When one person continually takes while the other continually gives, the relationship stops being a partnership and becomes an emotional transaction. The moment you recognize that your compassion is being treated as an unlimited resource instead of a gift, you begin to understand why protecting your own emotional well-being is not selfish. It is essential. Confidence can be loud, but true security is usually quiet. One of the greatest misconceptions about narcissistic behavior is the belief that arrogance comes from genuine self-belief. In reality, what often appears as confidence is a carefully constructed shield protecting a deeply fragile sense of self. The grandiosity, the constant need to be admired, the refusal to admit mistakes, and the relentless pursuit of superiority are often attempts to keep painful feelings of inadequacy hidden from both others and themselves. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain why it can seem so relentless. Imagine trying to balance a heavy object on a narrow pedestal. From a distance, it appears stable, but the slightest movement threatens to send everything crashing down. In much the same way, a narcissist's self-image often depends on constant reinforcement. Praise feels essential, criticism feels unbearable, and even small setbacks can trigger surprisingly intense reactions. What might seem like a simple disagreement to someone else may feel like a direct attack on their identity. Instead of responding with curiosity or accountability, they often react with anger, blame, denial, or attempts to discredit the other person. This hidden insecurity also explains why they struggle to acknowledge fault. Admitting a mistake requires a stable sense of self, one that can separate a poor decision from personal worth. But when someone's identity is built around appearing flawless, even minor accountability can feel emotionally threatening. Rather than saying, "I made a mistake," they may insist that someone else caused the problem, rewrite events, or refuse to discuss the issue altogether. Protecting the image becomes more important than repairing the relationship. The tragedy is that the people closest to them often become responsible for maintaining this fragile self-image. They are expected to provide endless reassurance, avoid difficult conversations, overlook hurtful behavior, and constantly reinforce the illusion of perfection. Over time, this creates a relationship where honesty is replaced by emotional management. Instead of speaking openly, loved ones begin choosing their words carefully, hoping to avoid triggering another defensive reaction. Understanding the insecurity beneath the grandiosity is important because it prevents you from taking every hurtful action personally. Their behavior is often driven by an internal struggle that existed long before you entered their life. However, recognizing the source of the behavior does not mean accepting it. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice, and understanding someone's emotional wounds does not obligate you to endure ongoing mistreatment. Real healing begins when you stop trying to rescue a fragile ego at the cost of your own emotional well-being. One of the most revealing signs of narcissistic behavior is not a single argument, betrayal, or broken promise. It is the repetition. The names, places, and circumstances may change, but the ending often feels remarkably familiar. A friendship begins with excitement and admiration, only to end in conflict and blame. A romantic relationship starts with intense affection, then slowly becomes filled with criticism, control, and emotional distance. A promising career is disrupted by repeated clashes with coworkers or authority figures. Time after time, different people enter the picture, yet the same pattern of destruction continues to unfold. When the outcome remains the same despite constantly changing environments, it is worth asking whether the real problem lies in the pattern itself. Many people become trapped because they believe each new beginning represents a fresh start. The narcissist often presents themselves as the victim of previous relationships, insisting that every former partner, friend, boss, or family member misunderstood them or treated them unfairly. At first, this story can sound convincing. You naturally want to believe that everyone deserves another chance. But as time passes, you may notice that the complaints never stop. Eventually, you find yourself becoming the next person who is accused of being selfish, ungrateful, or impossible to please. The roles change, but the script stays the same. This cycle continues because genuine change requires something very difficult: self-reflection. Healthy people occasionally pause and ask themselves, what role did I play in this situation? They can admit mistakes, learn from painful experiences, and adjust their behavior. A narcissist often struggles to do this because accepting responsibility threatens the carefully protected image they have of themselves. Instead of examining their actions, they search for someone else to blame. Without accountability, there is no meaningful growth. Without growth, the same behaviors naturally produce the same outcomes. For the people caught in this cycle, the emotional impact can be devastating. They spend months or even years believing they can be the exception. They convince themselves that if they love harder, communicate better, or sacrifice more, the relationship will finally become different. Unfortunately, no amount of effort can change a pattern that the other person refuses to acknowledge. The most empowering realization is that you are not responsible for breaking someone else's cycle of destruction. You are responsible for recognizing it before it becomes your future. Patterns reveal what promises often hide. When you stop listening only to words and start paying attention to repeated behavior, you gain the clarity needed to protect your peace, your confidence, and your emotional well-being. Breaking free from a narcissistic relationship is about far more than creating physical distance. The greatest challenge often begins after the relationship ends, because the emotional patterns can linger long after the person is gone. Many survivors spend months replaying conversations, questioning their decisions, or wondering if they were somehow responsible for what happened. This is why true freedom is not simply leaving the relationship. It is leaving behind the beliefs that the relationship planted inside you. The goal is not just to escape the narcissist, but to make sure their way of thinking no longer shapes your life. One of the biggest risks after experiencing narcissistic abuse is becoming emotionally hardened. After being manipulated, criticized, or betrayed, it is understandable to feel guarded. You may begin believing that no one can be trusted, or that every act of kindness has a hidden motive. While those reactions are natural, they can also become another form of loss. If the experience causes you to close your heart to everyone, then the damage continues long after the relationship has ended. Healing means learning to recognize unhealthy behavior without losing your ability to connect with healthy people. This is where awareness becomes your greatest protection. You no longer ignore constant disrespect because it is disguised as honesty. You no longer confuse control with love or intensity with intimacy. You stop chasing approval from people who only offer it conditionally. Instead, you begin paying attention to consistency, accountability, empathy, and mutual respect. These qualities may seem less dramatic than the emotional highs and lows of a narcissistic relationship, but they are the foundation of genuine emotional safety. Another important step is rebuilding your trust in yourself. Narcissistic relationships often teach people to doubt their instincts. You may have ignored countless warning signs because you were told you were overreacting or being too sensitive. Healing means giving yourself permission to believe what you see instead of what you are repeatedly told. Your intuition becomes stronger each time you choose reality over excuses. Perhaps the most powerful victory is refusing to become like the person who hurt you. Pain can tempt people to seek revenge, manipulate others, or build emotional walls so high that no one can get close. But real recovery is measured by something much greater. It is measured by your ability to remain compassionate without becoming naive, confident without becoming arrogant, and kind without accepting mistreatment. When you learn to protect your peace without sacrificing your character, you break the cycle completely. The narcissist may have influenced part of your story, but they no longer have the power to define the person you become. The strongest lesson to take away from everything we've discussed is this. Narcissists do not simply leave behind broken relationships, they leave behind broken realities. They make people question their worth, doubt their instincts, and carry burdens that never truly belonged to them. But the moment you understand these patterns, something remarkable begins to happen. The confusion starts to lift. The guilt begins to fade. And the story you've been telling yourself slowly changes from, "What is wrong with me?" to, "I finally understand what I was experiencing." Remember, their need for control is not proof that you are weak. Their constant criticism is not proof that you are inadequate. Their inability to celebrate your success is not proof that you don't deserve it. Their chaos is not evidence that healthy relationships are impossible. These behaviors reveal far more about their emotional world than they ever will about your value. Healing does not require you to win an argument, expose the narcissist, or wait for an apology that may never come. Healing begins the moment you stop seeking validation from someone who was never capable of giving it consistently. It begins when you trust your own perceptions again, establish healthy boundaries without guilt, and choose relationships where respect is mutual rather than conditional. Most importantly, never measure your worth by someone else's inability to appreciate it. The healthiest people in your life will not ask you to shrink so they can feel bigger. They will not demand that you sacrifice your peace to protect their ego. They will encourage your growth, celebrate your victories, and make you feel emotionally safe instead of emotionally exhausted. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end as just another video you watched. Let it become a turning point. Pay attention to patterns instead of promises. Trust consistent actions more than convincing words. Protect your peace as fiercely as you once protected the relationship. Because the day you stop trying to save someone determined to create chaos is the day you finally begin saving yourself. And sometimes, the most powerful act of healing is not changing the person who hurt you, it's refusing to let their behavior define the rest of your life.